Hello, I'm John Hopkins, and welcome back to my kitchen table. Today let's talk about bread. One of the most wonderful things you can do for your family is to make fresh bread. I love for my wife to come home from work at the end of a long day and walk into a house filled with the beautiful smell of fresh bread. She loves it too because she knows it'll be good. There are several misconceptions out there about making fresh bread. That it's difficult, expensive, messy, or just plain scary. And it need not be any of these. There are a few tools that you'll need if you want to make fresh bread. I will address them in a short companion video. In a couple of minutes we will transition briefly to a different format to talk about flour and putting together the other ingredients. Let's go back to the misconceptions, or a better way to view it, pleasant realities. Baking fresh bread is not difficult. I hope this video will make it even easier. It's really quite easy to make good bread and relatively difficult to make bad bread. As I actually do a batch later in this video, you'll see what I mean. Baking bread is not expensive. The few pieces that you need of equipment are things that will make your work easier and better with other dishes too. Buying yeast in the little packets, yes, that's expensive. If you buy it in larger amounts, the cost per batch is actually negligible. A 2-pound bag is much less than a 4-ounce jar. Not just per batch, but total. Baking bread need not be messy. Your first batch, maybe your second, may be a bit messy until you get the hang of it. But now, when I bake bread, the only thing left dirty by the time I put the bread in the oven is the pan that the bread is sitting on or in the case of a loaf. It need not be scary if you know what to expect. After this video, you should know what to expect. The downloadable companion booklet will give even more detail. I'm a home cook. I'm not an actor or a director. I don't have a crew or a studio. When I say welcome back to my kitchen table, I mean literally that. This video will not be slick. It probably will not get me an invitation to guest on Food Network. But it will give you some insights into baking bread. Subsequent videos will not be slick either, though I hope they will improve over time. But I hope they will help you, and that is the goal. After the rolls are out of the oven, I'll come back for a wrap-up. I hope you enjoy this video, but even more, I hope it's useful to you. That's the whole point.
Do I need bread flour? Bread flour is more simple to use. With a higher protein content, it gives a better texture and a better rise. If you're going to make a lot of bread, it's a good choice. On the other hand, all-purpose flour is more versatile. You can get the same texture and rise by adding vital wheat gluten to raise the protein level. Add 5 grams of vital wheat gluten per 100 grams of flour. Add the other ingredients. Add the sugar. For 300 grams of flour, I like about 1 tablespoon. Add the salt. For 300 grams, I use about 1/2 teaspoon. Do not leave the salt out. It has an important role to moderate the yeast. If you leave it out, you will get large bubbles and voids in your bread. I like to use diastatic malt powder, just under 1 tablespoon in this amount of flour. It gives a better and faster rise and helps with browning. Whisk all your ingredients together to mix well.
Okay, now we're at the counter. I have my water at 110 degrees, checked with my thermometer. I'm adding it to about a tablespoon of yeast and about a tablespoon of sugar. Now I'm mixing it together, and it'll need a few minutes to kind of resurrect itself and come back to life. I can already see it bubbling. As you can see, the flour that we already made is right here. I have carefully cleaned and sanitized the counter because I'm going to be working the dough directly on the counter. I've washed my hands carefully because I will be working the dough directly with my hands. The dough, or the yeast and the water are working together pretty well now. I can smell the yeasty fragrance. I can see some bubbles having formed. That tells me that the water was at the right temperature and that the yeast is adequately active. Now I'll put in about a half of my dry ingredients and stir it up. That'll take me to about the consistency of a thick batter. I could, of course, just put everything in at once, but it would just be a lot more difficult to work with, and I'd wind up with even more flour on the counter. So that's thoroughly mixed in. Now I'm adding the rest and putting my bowl out of the way and getting the rest mixed in. Now at this point I want to add a bit of oil. That's a couple of tablespoons or so. And I probably will want to add a little more water, but I want to see before I do. I want to see if it's going to be okay with this amount. Not much, but a little. One reason I said it's difficult to make bad bread at this point is because when I put it out on the counter to work it, it's going to look kind of shaggy. If you watch the cooking shows, when they start to knead the dough, it's always perfectly prepared. It's always very smooth and really neat little ball. I've never had it come out that way, but I've had a lot of bread do very well. So now what I need is a bit of flour on the countertop. And again, you can see this is why it's important to clean and sanitize the countertop beforehand. Because all I want in my bread is bread, not anything else. So I'm getting it out on the countertop, and I'm getting my hands covered with the flour. Because at this point the dough is quite loose and quite sticky. Now in a few minutes, working it, it will become less sticky and then finally not sticky at all. What you want to do once you get it started, it's not quite there yet, but once you get it started, you're going to want to push with the heel of your hand and turn it a little bit. You're going to need a little bit more flour. But you can see the bread dough is going to take up as much flour as it needs to be just right. So you want to push with your heel of your hand and rotate. I saw one recipe that insisted that you must always rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise. I don't remember which one they specified, but it's absurd to think that it would matter. What you want is push it with the heel of your hand and rotate it. What you want is for it to get to the point where it's not sticky anymore, and it'll spring back when you push your fingers into the dough ball. Now with a biscuit recipe, for instance, or pancakes, you want to be careful not to activate the gluten, because gluten is your enemy there. But here, that's the main thing we're doing, is activating the gluten. And we're getting everything thoroughly distributed within the dough ball. So, now it's feeling smooth. I don't mean the surface is smooth, although that's getting to be the case also. That it feels smooth when I push it, smooth internally. I'm just collecting the other flour and make sure I get just the right amount in there. Now, let's get it in the shape of a ball, more or less, and push, and it springs back. Not like it was a balloon, but it still springs back to some degree. I want a little bit more kneading. Pick up a little bit more flour. Get it back into the shape of a rough ball. Okay, now it's springing back pretty well. Now, I'll take my bowl from before and I'll put a bit of oil in there, again a tablespoon or two. I'll use the dough ball itself to spread it around inside the bowl. That way I cover the dough ball itself with oil, and at the same time I ensure that the dough will not be stuck to the bowl when I want to bring it out. Now at this point I'm going to cover the bowl with plastic wrap, and it'll sit for about between an hour and 15 minutes and 2 hours, depending on the ambient temperature. I'm expecting about an hour and a half today, but we'll pick up there. Okay, it's been about an hour and a half now. The dough has doubled in size. As you can see, I put plastic wrap over the bowl to keep it from drying out, or you could also use a moistened tea towel. So I'm taking the dough and putting it onto the counter. Now my scale comes back into use, because I'm going to want exactly 100 gram size rolls. And my wax paper squares come into use because I don't want to make a mess on my scale. My scale is set to measure in grams. I've now zeroed it, and I'll cut off a piece of dough likely to be somewhere near 100 grams. Not bad, 96, but I want exactly 100 grams. 104, close, but still no cigar. 100 exactly. So, take the dough, I'll squeeze it together because I've got 3 pieces here. And now it's all one piece. Now I'll just pound it out on the counter. To where it's a flat piece. Now I want to gather it back up again. I'll squeeze it so that it's squeezed together on the bottom. Now I'll roll it. To make a ball. I'm using the counter with very little to no flour on it, so that it actually sticks a little bit to the counter, and that'll cause it to stretch and reconnect with itself. So I get what amounts to an almost perfect sphere. And then onto a baking sheet with a silicone mat on it so it won't stick and the rolls won't get too brown. Cut off another piece. Let's try again for 100 grams. 107, close but no cigar. 98, again, close. 100 grams exactly. My wife and I have discussed at some length what the roll should weigh at this point. I like a little larger roll, but she likes a little smaller roll, and I like her more than I like bread, so smaller roll it is. I could do this, instead of pounding on it on the counter, I could roll them out with a rolling pin but I find I get more control this way. Also, if I don't dirty the rolling pin, I don't have to wash the rolling pin. Again, a near perfect sphere onto the baking sheet with the silicone mat. It won't make you sit through all of these, but one more. $125, too much. 105, close. 100 exactly. So squeeze back together, pound it out on the counter, bring up the edges, squeeze it on the bottom so that it kind of comes together, and roll. I've got it under my hand and I've got my hand cupped and the dough underneath. So it's kind of rolling around in there, but it's interacting mostly with the countertop. I expect to get 6 rolls out of 300 grams of flour with a little bit left over, not a lot. Exactly 100 grams. I know this is about as fascinating as rolling dough, so I'll cut most of this part out. Okay, 6 rolls. That's about all I can get on the counter, on the baking sheet comfortably. I don't like for them to touch. And then they will rise one more time, again about double in size. Now some people say you need to press these down a bit so they're flatter, so you don't wind up with buns that are too high. But I find that once they double in size again and get a lot less dense in the process, they will flatten themselves out. So at this point, I'm going to want to cover with a clean towel and give them about 45 minutes to again rise a second time to about double their current size. And in the process, in the meantime, I will clean up so that by the time they go into the oven, the only mess remaining from making bread will be the pan they're actually sitting on. Okay, now it's been 45 minutes and the rolls have had a chance to rise a second time and double in volume. And I'm going to put them now in the oven where they will stay for 15 minutes or so, rotating about halfway through. Okay, it's now been almost exactly 13 minutes and I'm bringing them out onto a place where they can be safe and then to a cooling rack. Now you'll notice they're a little bit high and round at this point, but as they cool, they will flatten a bit and shrink just a tiny little bit. And in about 45 minutes, they'll be ready to serve. And they will be great. I'll just cover them with the same clean towel that they had their second rise under. And I know it's tempting at this point to eat them as soon as they're cool enough to handle, but don't do it. If you do that, they'll be hard on the outside and gummy on the inside. But in about 45 minutes, they'll be perfect. The rolls are cooling. You may recall that before I rolled it into a ball and I flattened out the 100-gram portion of dough. If you use a bit of a larger portion, let's say 150 grams, you might want to add some cheese and room temperature meat to the center. I like ground beef taco filling for that. Place the cheese first in the center and then the meat. Bring up the edges and seal with your fingers. Turn them over, seam side down, and let them rise just a bit, and then into the oven until nicely brown. You will get great sandwiches with the filling baked right inside. Let them cool. The filling will be very hot. The same dough will work perfectly for pizza too. I put mine on a sprayed, round, 10.5-inch iron griddle. I let it rise a little bit and then bake it a few minutes without the toppings in the oven, just to kind of crisp it up on the bottom especially, and then top and finish. 300 grams of flour should yield about 600 grams of finished dough. That 2-to-1 ratio can be a guide for you. That 600 grams will make a pretty good loaf. When you bring it out of the bowl it rose in, roll it out into the best rectangle you can, just a little bit less wide than the length of your loaf pan. Roll it up, seal the ends, and put it in a loaf pan. I like to also kind of tuck the ends under so that you get a smooth top. Then bake it in a 350-degree oven or about 175 Celsius for about 30 minutes until nicely browned and sounding a little hollow when thumped. Now you might be tempted, as I often am, to sprinkle the flattened out, rolled out dough with cinnamon and sugar and make cinnamon bread. You need a more substantial dough for that. Something made with warm milk and room temperature egg as the main liquid. So, try making some bread. There is a bit of a learning curve, but what worthwhile thing doesn't have one?